Today at the National Press Club, Scott Farquhar, co-founder of software company Atlassian. He's also chair of a philanthropic movement getting companies to pledge billions to charities. Scott Farquhar with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club for today's Westpac address. I'm Tom Connell, the president of the club and also the chief election analyst at Sky News. Today's speaker is Scott Farquhar, who is the co-founder of Atlassian and also the chair of Tech Australia. So we arrive today at a period at which, just back there up on the hill, most days the talking points include AI, and I would say every day includes the word productivity. So what better time to get someone who knows a little bit about those things than Scott Farquhar to talk about, I suspect, more the opportunity side. Obviously, going back hundreds of years, technology has always excited some and put fear into others. We still have the term Luddite for the fear of technology, of course, for the people that destroyed the machines they thought would take their jobs. And the other side, of course, always of technology is creating new jobs and transforming the ones we are in right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Scott Farquhar.
Thank you, the National Press Club, for this invitation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us today. I'm also personally delighted to be joined today by my wife, Kim Jackson, my parents, my co-founder, Mike, my dear friends and colleagues. Your support means a lot to me, and I wouldn't be here today without it. It's a genuine honour to stand here at this podium, a place where so many of Australia's most important debates have been aired and some of our greatest ideas first shared. Now, whilst it's an honour, to be honest, I'm here a little reluctantly. Over my career, I've always preferred doing rather than talking. Building things, solving problems, creating new ventures, not giving speeches about them. But I'm here today because I believe Australia is standing at the edge of the next great industrial revolution, one powered not by steam or electricity, but by artificial intelligence. And like every revolution before it, the choices we make now will shape not just our economy, but the kind of country that we become. So I've always been a techno-optimist. I'm going to take you back to 1991 when Darryl Braithwaite was topping the charts with his song The Horses. I was living in a lower middle class family, attending Castle Hill Public School under the watchful eye of my teacher, Mrs. Crawford. Our class was given an assignment to imagine the future. I had a barely functioning computer. I'd never heard of what was then the nascent internet, nor I'd seen what was then a near brick-sized mobile phone. But let me read you a little excerpt from my 12-year-old Scott. In the future, adults will no longer get up at all hours of the morning to go to work. Instead, they will wake up and walk over to their home computer. The computer will be linked to a main computer at their work. Anything they would need is on that computer. In the future, there will be no supermarkets. Instead, people will write out a shopping list and order that over a machine. You'll even be able to find out how much the shopping bill will cost before you order. That must have been really important to me back then. There will be factories run by one person and thousands of machines. They will make computer parts, cars, televisions, and even other robots. So it seemed obvious to me back then that we would have online shopping and education, online work and entertainment. But back in 1991, we didn't know which companies and which nations were going to win. The scoreboard was blank. Now, not everything I predicted came true. I predicted Synoleums, which were giant 10-storey, zero-gravity places where you could bounce around for fun. I'm still waiting on those, but in a fit of optimism this week, I did register Synoleum.com, which, as we all know, is the first step to great business. And even though I'd come from the rite of passage that is the Year 6 pilgrimage to Questacon and Parliament House, I made no mention of the role that government would need to play. So roll forward 20 years, and the last time I gave a major speech was the Bradfield Lecture. I argued back then that we were in a golden age of software, which would transform how we live and work. But back then, in 2014, most of the winners of the software industry were obvious. We had Netflix and Uber and Facebook. We had Workday and Salesforce and Atlassian. And though some companies have emerged since then, the scoreboard had largely been filled in. Now, when it came to the government in 2014, there weren't too many big requests. Sure, I wanted to make it easier to hire and retain staff, and to be honest, we still need those things today. But the best thing the government could do back then for the software industry was to leave it alone. I thought a lot about J.J. Bradfield after I gave a speech in his name. Bradfield wasn't just the visionary engineer that we know who was behind the Harbour Bridge. He also championed electrifying Sydney's trains and building the underground city circle, and he did that a full decade ahead of the New York subway being completed. He argued then that electrified trains would boost productivity, cut pollution, and open up the suburbs. But at that time, electricity was new and unsettling, invisible compared to the noise and steam that came from steam engines. It required massive investment in power stations, wires, and trains, and it threatened jobs that were tied to steam locomotives. Yet back then, the government of the day took a bet, and we're all better for it. I'm here today to talk about artificial intelligence, and we hear many of these same arguments today. It's mysterious and dangerous. It requires new infrastructure. We will need different jobs. So many of the same arguments that we made against electrification of our trains 100 years ago. And when I spoke at that lecture 10 years ago, what we needed was for the government to get out of the way. Today, we need to partner with the government to pave the way, because the scale of the opportunity and risks of missing out demand a new kind of partnership, one that moves at the speed of technology, not at the speed of bureaucracy. So why am I the one here standing here today to talk about this? Why do I deserve to be that person? I'm currently the chair of the Tech Council of Australia, so I speak not only on behalf of the Australian tech companies that exist today, but also on behalf of those companies that do not yet exist today, but will if we play our cards right. I also co-founded a company called Atlassian. You may have heard of it. And my friend Mike and I started with just the two of us 25 years ago, with a dream and a bit of Australian optimism. And we've grown that to 13,000 staff now around the world, 300,000 customers, and millions of people who use our products on a daily basis. Atlassian does about $8 billion in revenue, and we sell our products to pretty much every country on the planet. And when I think about Atlassian, it's not just the revenue impact. Atlassian is the keystone species in the entire Australian tech ecosystem. We provide talent. So former Atlassians now have key roles at startups such as Safety Culture and Culture Amp and Canva. There's more than 140 startups that have been started by ex-Atlassians. We provide capital. The success of Atlassian has allowed Mike and I to reinvest in many Australian startups. We provide mentoring. We've supported or advised nearly every Australian tech company, from BuildKite to Employment Hero and everything in between. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an Australian tech company that we have not had some influence on. I also have deep experience with artificial intelligence, not just through Atlassian, where we have thousands of engineers who work on artificial intelligence, but also through my many personal investments with Kim in AI companies in the Australian ecosystem and beyond. So to understand the scale of the AI opportunity, it helps to look back. The history of human progress is the history of how we've harnessed energies in new ways to do useful work. Now, historically, these activities were physical. It was once hard to move people across a continent. It was once hard to cross an ocean. It was once hard to plough a field. Now we barely think about them. Because when we do this, what was once hard becomes easy. I'll say that again. When we harness energy in new ways, what was once hard becomes easy. And when that happens, nations can rise or fall based on how they respond. And as someone who spent most of my life in technology, I know that when new technologies are created, small initial advantages can compound over time into unassailable leads. Small initial advantages, things that are almost imperceptible at the start, can compound over time into unassailable leads. 200 years ago, England benefited from accessible coal deposits, which led them to build railways, which led them to even more accessible coal deposits, and the virtuous cycle began. That led them to, of course, invent the Watt steam engine, and then the Bessemer process for processing steel, And on the back of coal-powered steam and the steel that they created, they built a navy. And of course, an empire that went on to last well over a century. It seems a long time ago, even to me, as my kids will think. Let's take a more recent example, Singapore. In the 1970s, Singapore recognised that container ships were a transformative technology, not just a passing trend. Singapore opened its first container port well ahead of most of their Southeast Asian rivals and ahead of most of the European ports. Singapore rose from a swampland to a first world nation. But it wasn't a foregone conclusion that Singapore would rise. If you go back and look, there are actually 4 other ports in that region that were geographically well placed. But Singapore acted early, and they pressed on their natural advantages, and they turned them into enduring economic strength. Today, we are at another inflection point. We're entering a new energy revolution, but this time we're using energy to power knowledge work. Not physical work, using energy to power knowledge work. And just as we've gotten used to using energy to power physical work, we actually have to get used to and comfortable with using energy to power knowledge work. We in Australia have abundant advantages in this race. We have energy, we have vast land, a strong legal system, world-class engineers, and we have a strategic location in Southeast Asia. And just like Singapore, we can press those advantages. So ironically, Singapore has placed a moratorium on data centres because they were running out of power and land, things that are fundamentally difficult for them to change. And that brings me to the first opportunity that I want to talk about today. Australia has an opportunity to host data centres for the entire Southeast Asian region and potentially beyond. Now, just like most people don't think on a daily basis about the source of their water or their power, most people don't think about how integral data centres are to everyday life. When an app on your phone reroutes you in traffic, maybe not so important in Canberra, but definitely where I come from in Sydney, that is an issue. When it routes you around traffic, getting you to work on time, it uses a little power in your phone, and it uses a lot more power in a data centre somewhere. When my son learns math from an AI chatbot, it uses computing power hosted in a data centre. When you watch Netflix, or as I do, replays of the Tour de France on SBS, it's only possible because of data centres. And it's easy to think of data centres as existing to help other people. These big international tech companies are building data centres, and who knows what happens within them. But the truth is that each of us uses a fraction of the computing power of a data centre every single day. The buildings, the computers, the power, the water, all those are in service of making our lives either more productive or more enjoyable. And when Netflix or Amazon or Google or Facebook choose where to put a data centre, they consider a lot of factors. How much it costs to build, the price and availability of power and water, and in this age, power is all green power. The laws of the country where they're putting that data centre, the talent density to build it and run it, and finally, in this world of geopolitics and tariffs, the availability of cutting-edge computer chips. And in all these factors, Australia scores well. We are surprisingly cost competitive building data centres. We have the talent density needed, and we have attractively priced green power. But there are areas that hold us back from an even bigger opportunity. We should be powering the entire region. We should be exporting megawatts as megabytes, and in return, getting paid megabucks, to put an Australianism. I believe this is a multi-billion-dollar, multi-decade opportunity. And to do that, we need to systematically remove barriers to growth. Now, the first barrier, and this may seem really esoteric, but it's actually really important, is we need to make changes to our copyright laws. Australia's copyright laws are out of sync with the rest of the world. And while the USA and Europe have exemptions for fair use for text and data mining, and the Australian Law Commission in 2014 recommended changes, and the Australian Productivity Commission in 2016 recommended changes, we remain an outlier when it comes to copyright. So this is a barrier to AI companies who want to train or host their models in Australia. And this is even a barrier to Australian-born companies who want to build AI models here. We're in a perverse situation where copyright holders don't see a single dollar of extra money as a result of our laws, but we miss out on the economic upside of hosting and training models in Australia. So my first ask today of government is for the Attorney-General to urgently amend our Copyright Act to look at fair use and text and data mining exceptions. Fixing this one thing could unlock billions of dollars of foreign investment in Australia. Another barrier is talent. We talk a lot about the theoretical future job losses of AI, but we ignore the very real jobs that are available today. Electricians, plumbers, air conditioning technicians, solar and battery installers. These are high-paying jobs that are available that we need right now, and we just don't have enough. It can take a 4-year apprenticeship to train or retrain in these areas. But many of these jobs I talked about, these technical jobs, do not require all these skills. They only require a subset of a full qualification. We also know that it's hard for mid-career people to retrain in a 4-year apprenticeship. So I'm calling on support and partnership with the unions to create tech trades, digital apprenticeships, short, practical qualifications that could be completed in 6 or 12 months to get people ready for high-demand industries like data centre construction and battery installation. These should be stepping stones to full trades like an electrician or a plumber, but in the meantime, we get more Australians out-trained and get them working. The last barrier I want to talk about is sovereignty. Now, just like the Australian government and Australian businesses like to host their data locally to be subject to our laws and protections, other countries, of course, have the same desire. And if we want their business to host their data centres here in Australia, we need to solve for this. So I propose a bold and novel plan. Just like we host embassies from around the world on Australian soil, Australia should host digital embassies, secure, sovereign cloud vaults that host countries' most important data, operating under the laws of that country. Why host your foreign data in any other country when you could host it in Australia with cheaper power, faster build times, under the laws of your own country? We could be the provider of choice for every government in the region and for every business that needs a Southeast Asian data centre. Whilst data centres are, of course, a nation-building opportunity and infrastructure is critical, the real economic transformation happens at the application layer. If Australian businesses simply adopted existing AI tools, we'd see a major productivity lift. Research by the Tech Council that I'm chair of shows this could add up to $115 billion a year in addition to our economy by 2030. Now, business leaders regularly ask me, what should they be doing differently with AI? What should they be doing today to take advantage of this? And I tell them 3 things. First, use it yourself every single day. And I'll say that to every person in this room and every person watching at home in a knowledge area. You should be using AI every single day. It is something that's going to be a little bit weird. It's going to be a little bit different. It's a new tool that you haven't used before, but you absolutely need to do that to understand what is coming and be a leader for the future. You need to redesign your internal processes. So particularly things like customer service, sales, admin. I'll give you an example of how you can transform. This smart ring on my finger had a battery issue this week. And over breakfast, I had my mouth full and one hand eating. I tapped contact support in the app. I interacted with an AI chatbot that asked me a few questions and said, yep, I definitely need a battery replacement, asked me to confirm my address, asked me to confirm my ring size, and that was it. I managed to interact with that. It was the best customer service interaction I've had in a long time. Over breakfast, with my mouth and my hand full. So that's what consumers, particularly younger consumers, have come to expect. And thirdly, you need to reimagine your core business offering. What problems do you solve, and how does AI allow you to solve them 10 times better? Each tech shift gives you a choice. You can either disrupt others or be disrupted. Now, the best businesses in Australia are systematically doing this, methodically doing this, reinventing themselves. So given that businesses are motivated and capable to move to AI themselves, what is the role of government? It's the same. Firstly, politicians, bureaucrats, leaders in government need to be using AI themselves. They need to be using it on a daily basis to understand what is possible. Second, governments need to be redesigning back-office systems and how they interact with customers. Let's be honest, governments aren't exactly known for delivering world-class customer service, and in some cases, private businesses can step in to ease the pain. If you're a small business, you may have experienced this. Many accounting systems already file electronic statements with the government, such as your BAS or your tax return. And or if you're a bus stop, you've used your favourite app to check when buses are going to arrive. These things are possible when the government provides an API. So an API, for those of you unaware, is a way for two systems to talk to each other. It's what your phone uses when you check your bank balance, or an online store to allow you to track your delivery in real time. APIs are the invisible plumbing of modern software. I want to give you an example. Christian Beck, who runs a tech company in Australia, Leap Legal, tell me that they've made law firms dramatically more productive by using AI to help lawyers automate their workflows, speed up contract review, do e-discovery in record time. But there's one thing that drags them backwards today, and that is interacting with the courts. So despite all the AI and automation inside a law firm, when lawyers need to interact with the court system, it's still one step above being paper-based. They're forced to copy and paste information into clunky court systems. Say that 3 times fast. When they wait for updates, they manually refresh web pages. So you've got expensive lawyers training, years to sit there refreshing web pages. They re-enter the same data again and again. And all this is because the court does not have an API. Now, as businesses increasingly move at an AI pace, as AI enables us all to move faster, governments are going to increasingly become the bottleneck. So I call upon all levels of government to make their services available via an API. Interacting with the courts, renewing a license, applying for a passport, claiming the childcare subsidy should all be possible electronically and embedded in third-party applications. And these shouldn't be 7-year consulting projects. Modern tools mean that we can complete these in weeks and months, not in years. APIs are also the building blocks to using artificial intelligence at scale. We need to build on them and go even further. We should be creating digital agents for every interaction with government. I'm going to use an example from local government, housing, because it's such a pressing issue for our nation. Now, as anyone who has built or renovated a house knows, the approvals process can be arduous. And I have some first-hand experience of this myself. You take months to compile hundreds of pages of documentation across all facets of what you're building, submit it to council, and in some cases that still requires printing it out and taking it there, and then you wait. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months. The process can seem opaque and arbitrary. You can't start locking in builders or tradies to start moving. Because you're unsure of your chance of success. And as we've seen over the past few years, as you wait, the cost of everything is going up. If something needs to be changed, you're changing it at the end of your entire process, which of course is the worst time to be making changes. Not only is this frustrating for every person who's ever submitted a development application, imagine how many applications aren't filed. How many people decide to not do it, to not build? Instead, what if you trained an AI agent on every application that had ever been filed? All the applications that were successful and all the applications that were not. And all the changes that people made along the way. What if that agent worked with a council officer to ensure approvals or rejections happened within a week of filing your development application? Let's take it one step further. What if that agent was available to the public? Not to approve your application, but anytime, day or night, you could send in your application and within minutes get a percentage chance of success. Wouldn't that change the way you worked with your builder? Let's take it further still. A developer would know whether the block of apartments they want to build are likely to be possible before they even purchase the land. Wouldn't that dramatically increase the number of, not only the number of applications that were submitted, but the number of complying and successful applications? We could dramatically increase the number of dwellings built without changing a single law. Now, you can take this concept to every way of government. Imagine a smart, talented European thinking of moving to Australia. They found their dream job on Seek. What if they could find out in minutes what their chances of a visa were? So I say we should create a world where every interaction with government is assisted by digital agents. I don't think we should take humans out of the loop for approvals, but we could dramatically change the way that we work with government. This technology already exists. We're seeing it in private enterprise, so why not our governments? The third thing, like business leaders I tell, is that the third thing that business leaders need to do, but governments also need to do, is to step back and rethink their core service offerings. And you shouldn't be thinking about what's possible today, but what's going to be possible in the future. About 30% of our federal government is spent on health, education and defence. And in all these areas, the government either provides the services or heavily regulates them, or both. And all these areas are being disrupted by AI. It's clear the direction many of these are headed, and we as a nation need to skate to where the puck is going. Take health diagnosis for an example. A company we've invested in called MetaOptima has a machine that uses dozens of iPhone-grade cameras to scan for skin cancer, working in a similar way to airport body scanners. You stand there and it scans around you. Don't get the two confused, because one works best in your underwear. Once scanned, though, it can tell the difference between a mole and a skin cancer. Now, today, skin cancer screening is the domain of dermatologists and GPs, but you often can wait 3 months to see a specialist. So do we want dermatologists spending their time with a magnifying glass searching for skin cancers? Or do we want them with a scalpel removing them? These technologies are coming. They will save lives, but they will also disrupt the current way of doing things. Governments should move faster to remove regulatory barriers to new ways of working, not just in health, but education and defence. And in all cases, it's clear that the future is going to be augmented with software and AI. Let's race towards that future. History's shown that countries that adopt these new technologies earlier gain enduring advantages. And I believe that living in the future helps you to create it. I focus this speech on bold, new ideas, but there are plenty of basics that still need to be fixed. It's still too hard to migrate exceptional talent to Australia. It's too hard for startups to reward them with stock options. And whilst I believe that AI regulations are largely a fit for the AI age, there is uncertainty around the potential for future legislation that is already deterring international investment. These and other recommendations will be contained in a white paper that the Tech Council of Australia will be releasing ahead of the upcoming Productivity Roundtable. I'm also delighted to announce the launch of the National Security Tech Alliance, a new initiative bringing together 27 of Australia's leading technology companies. The NSTA will act as a strategic partner to the government to help build a partnership between government and industry for the future. So to close, an AI-enabled future is more rosy than my 12-year-old self could have ever imagined. History has shown in these times of change, nations that capitalise on their natural advantages can build compounding and enduring prosperity. A century ago, J.J. Bradfield showed what can happen when governments build for the future instead of the past. We have the raw materials, the talent, the energy, the values, the strategic location to lead this world in the next industrial revolution. But leadership is a choice, and we have to choose it now. So let's build AI capabilities, not wait for them. Let's build skills, not accept shortages. Let's build digital infrastructure and not accept bottlenecks. The scoreboard of the AI era is blank. The race is still on, and Australia has everything to play for. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Scott. Go to my colleagues in a moment. I was struck by the accuracy of 12-year-old Scott. I wonder what specific predictions 45-year-old Scott has for the future. You've obviously fleshed out things that change, but what do you think specifically will change about our everyday lives in 20, 30 years?
I wish I had the imagination of my 12-year-old to be able to predict that, and I do think it's moving faster than before. I do think that the big change we need to get used to is we got used to using energy for, harvesting, crops, right? And we don't lament today that, we don't have thousands of people out there in fields, cropping, ploughing fields. I don't think we'll lament that, we have people today answering repetitive queries in a call centre. I do think that, we'll look back and say, wow, there's better uses of those people's time, energy, creativity. but it is going to be a transition for us to use energy for knowledge work, and that's going to change how we interact there. As a techno-optimist, I just believe that future is amazing. I think that, health, disease, there's a lot of things that we don't know about the human body, and can we change that to be a much better thing? Can we live to 120 as most people, for most people? I think there's a lot of things we can do: health, education, and prosperity. Right? It's easy to see we're going to have TV. What's going to be in the future?
And I guess, you alluded to there's always going to be fear in change, whether it be someone right now who's 35, 40, in the middle of a career, maybe a parent wondering what on earth their kid should study, or what industry might be gone. How do you assuage people of that fear? Because once they have that, that's usually reflected onto politicians who then set policies, and that's how it all happens.
Yes, people ask me what their kids should study in school, and there's been a lot of stories around we need less software developers at the moment. And it's interesting, there's all those questions, all those stories around junior software engineers who did very routine, repetitive tasks, and also junior lawyers who do routine, repetitive tasks. But the senior software engineers and the senior lawyers are much more effective and more capable than ever before. And I do think that AI is going to change and augment our jobs. Let me take an example. There's an Australian health tech company called Heidi Health. And Heidi Health is used by doctors and specialists. And what it does is it sits on the desk on their phone and records your conversation with the doctor, the whole interaction. And at the end, it will then send, using templates that the doctor has set up, it'll send a letter back to the GP, explaining what the problem was. It'll send a letter to the patient. It'll send the prescription off to the pharmacy, and it'll update all the notes for the doctor. And so the doctor now spends 20 minutes, or used to spend 20 minutes with a patient and 20 minutes doing paperwork. Now it's 20 minutes with a patient and 20 seconds doing paperwork. And so that's changed how doctors, they're more productive, but they're also enjoying their jobs a lot more. If we roll that forward to teachers, teachers I know, every teacher I know, enjoys the time they spend with students. They love the joy of learning. Like, they see their students advance and grow as humans, and they just really get a lot of energy out of that. And the number one complaint that teachers have is paperwork. They spend too much time away from students, writing reports, interacting with parents. What if there was a Heidi Health equivalent of for teachers? Wouldn't every teacher enjoy their job a lot more and stay in the profession? And so when I look at it, yes, there'll be job changes, and we'll look back in 20 years' time and say, wow, some of those jobs we did seemed menial in hindsight. But I look at a lot of our jobs, I think, can become way more enjoyable and interesting as a result of AI.
Yeah, the current ones as well. First question from the floor, Andrew Probyn from 9 News.
Yeah, Andrew Probyn from the 9 Network, Scott. Can I ask you about the dark side of tech? And you mentioned data mining before. As you're aware, the government is about to, is legislating a ban on social media for under 16s. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, whether you worry it might constrain some of the capabilities or whether you fully support it. And perhaps in answering that question, you could reflect on your own household, the Farquhar household. You understand tech better than almost everyone in this room, except for maybe one guy. And and maybe you could tell us what rules you put around social media use for your kids to instruct us all.
Right. I know that the government has made some changes or proposed changes to the social media ban today. I haven't had a chance to get across those changes. And the Tech Council of Australia doesn't represent, social media companies. We've really looked at Australian-based, technologies, and so it's not an area of expertise. Of course, as you alluded to, I have 3 school-age children, and so I have a personal interest in what I do for my children. I'm not sure if we go through, my wife's here to go through our particular things at home. Our kids have very defined screen time, is what we call it, and within that screen time they have to do some educational component on the screen. Largely, it's usually maths, and we've tried lots of different things there, and so they get a certain amount of time if they do maths on a screen, and then they get a certain amount of time to do other things on their screens. And one of my children loves Minecraft and has built Minecraft worlds, but also uses Minecraft and fights other people in a Minecraft world that they built. and other of my kids enjoy watching things on YouTube or learning about things. And so for us, it's constraining the screen time and being aware of what they do on it. Rather than anything particular.
What about the worry as a parent as to what is on it? I mean, we know that radicalisation, for example, can happen very quickly. What comment can you bring on the darker side of what there is on the interweb?
Yeah, we spend time with our kids to go through and educate them at an age appropriate about what things they need to be worried about on the internet, in the same way that we educate them about crossing the road. It's something that they need to be good at as we go through this digital life. And we spend time looking at what they are spending time on the internet. And so at every stage when they adopt a new platform, we spend time chatting with about the dangers and also the opportunities of that platform. I will say my kids are much more educated about the world than I was at their age, because of the availability of online educational content that they can access very quickly and easily online. Whereas in my age, I'd have to go to the library and take books out, and I was lucky to be a reader, but many people don't learn that way. So our kids are very worldly as a result.
I might tell my 5-year-old, Scott Farquhar says, do some maths on your tablet now and see if that works. Andrew Tillett from the AFR.
Thanks, Tom. Andrew Tillett from the AFR and Vice President here at the club. Scott, talking about AI, a few weeks ago, before the Prime Minister went to China, the Chinese ambassador talked about wanting to do cooperation with Australia on AI development. We obviously have concerns among the national security types around any sort of collaboration with China on technology and things like that. I wonder what your thoughts are. Is there a way of doing it safely? Are we potentially falling behind in the tech race by not collaborating with China on AI, electrification, things like that?
I'm not an expert on national security, so I can't really talk in that. And I do believe that those things are a very nuanced conversation. I think it's clear that our largest security partner is the United States and our largest trading partner is China. And how do we play an advantageous role of both of those? I don't think that the world is in need of another large language model. Like, I think we are all, there's quite a few of those out there, and there are, businesses can choose what they want to use on any daily basis. They can choose a US one if they want that there, or if they can choose a Chinese one, or they can choose a European one at the moment. And so I think the choice makes sense for a lot of businesses. I think governments or highly secure people just need to make an informed choice about what they use at any point in time.
Thank you.
Millie Maroy from the SMH.
Hi Scott, thanks for the speech. You rightly talked about a lot of the upsides of AI, but there's also some costs and risks, as you know. According to a report in The Australian, Atlassian cut 150 jobs this morning, delivering that news through a video message and saying those jobs would be replaced by AI. Did you know those cuts were coming, and is this the future we can expect from AI?
Yeah. Look, there will be jobs changes across the industry as a result of this. And when some jobs become more productive, you need less of them, and some jobs become more productive and you need more of them. If we could make data centers cheaper than other countries in the world, we would need more people to create data centers. If we make call center staff more productive, people aren't going to call more, we probably need less call center staff. So some parts of our economy will grow significantly as AI makes them more productive, and some parts of our economy will shrink as we do that. I think, in these times, like any time, we should be help our employees to make that transition, both at a company level, but also at a national level. And particularly in Australia, I feel very privileged and blessed that we live in a nation that has a very strong social safety net and very strong skilling opportunities for our people to reskill into new areas. And so I think that compared to many nations, that every nation in the world is going to go through the same thing. Compared to other nations, I think we're well placed for that. But I do worry if, as a nation, we say we want to stick and have the jobs of the past. That's not a good plan for us. I also think that if we say the burden of retraining fits on the companies that are making those changes, that can put us at a comparative disadvantage to other places in the world. And so take a call center analogy. If you said, hey, everyone that's leaving a call center has to be paid for by that call center, we'll send even more jobs offshore as our call centres become less competitive on a global basis. And so there's a little sharing that has to happen across all areas, but I feel confident that we can do that. We just can't dig our heels in and say the jobs of today will be the jobs in 20 years.
And just in terms of Atlassian's job cuts, did you know about those?
We're always changing the number of people we have at Atlassian on a regular basis, and so there will always be jobs. We're adding thousands of jobs this year, and we're rebalancing small ones, and so there's always those changes.
Jack Quayle from The Australian.
Hi Scott, Jack Quayle from The Australian. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been nearly a year now since you stepped down as co-CEO of Atlassian. I just wanted to draw your thoughts on reports in our masthead in the last few weeks. Just can you expand on your decision to leave the company, and how would you describe the state of the internal culture at Atlassian when you stepped down as co-CEO?
Yeah, so as it's probably said at the time, like I was super excited to take on a bigger role in the tech industry, which I hope I've proven out today. I wanted to spend some time with my family and aggressively travelling, and I just completed an Ironman, which I'm happy to talk about at great length here, if you would like to hear about that. It was the culture at Atlassian, I think, has been as strong as it's ever been throughout our entire history, like in 23 years. And so, and I put the culture at Atlassian at any stage against any other company. People love working there because of the opportunities we get and the way that we treat each other. And so, my co-founder is here today, and we've had. I feel thankful for him that I've had the opportunity to now step on and do other things out there in the world beyond Atlassian.
Thanks.
Justin Hendry from Innovation Oz.
Hi Scott, thanks for the speech. The government has expressed a desire to avoid a future shaped by, I guess, global AI giants and secure a stake in AI development. What does sovereign AI mean to you? And on the concept of data embassies or digital embassies, would we be ceding sovereignty to powerful foreign interests?
Yeah, well, we take them in two ways. Let me talk about the AI supply chain, which I didn't really cover in my speech. If you think about all the things that happen to deliver AI to a customer, it starts with power and data centers, which I touched on deeply in my speech. I think we're in a very good situation there. The more I scratch, the more I'm surprised at how competitively we are globally to build data centers. I think because nations that maybe have a lower cost of labour aren't as good at building big projects. So Australia is really uniquely positioned, despite our high labour costs, to do that well. And then energy-wise, we have abundance of solar, wind, batteries, and if we don't have it now, we can install those things relatively quickly. It's actually approval process that's holding us back there. So we're in a good spot there. Then you say, okay, chips. Chips are largely dominated by South Korea and Taiwan. And that's going to be, they've made 20 to 50-year investments in doing that. That's not something that's going to be disrupted. But over time, if quantum plays out the way that the people in that industry expect it to play out, quantum can play a huge role in AI chips. Australia has a very strong quantum industry. It's been supported over a long period of time by both sides of government. And if we can continue that, there's a chance that we could play a major role in the chips of the future. Then you get to models and data. I don't think the world's calling out for another large language model. I think there's plenty of those out there. And so it probably makes sense for us to work with a partner with them or adopt an open source one. If AI models become crucial to business processes and government processes, we need to work out what is a resilient way of doing that. If a fibre cable gets cut or there's a tariff war or some other thing out there, we want to make sure that we have our own sovereignty on that particular case. But that may not be owning it. It could be in a data centre where we have sovereignty over it, or there's a lot of ways to solve for that. And then that's models and data. On data, we have the copyright stuff we talked about, but we have unique data sets in Australia. So health is one. We have a very heterogeneous population. We have a very we have a sort of a government-sponsored health system, so we have a lot of health data that could be used to power unique health models in AI. So there's a lot of things on models and data that I think the government can be doing. And lastly, on applications, that is adopting them early and building them, and that's companies like Atlassian and Canva and all the AI tech companies, Nira, like that could be doing that. So that's sort of the ecosystem. Do you want to talk about the second part of your question? Just remind me what it was.
Yeah, ceding sovereignty to powerful foreign interests through the embassy concept.
Look, I think much like we have a strategic fuel reserve, we want to make sure we're resilient to shocks like internationally. That doesn't mean that we produce and mine or drill oil in Australia and produce it all here. It means that we've created a buffer in case there's some shock internationally. I think that makes sense to do for all important technologies that are crucial to our modern world. I will say as we move more and more to green energy, we'll need less of a strategic fuel reserve. But in an AI sense, if AI gets baked in, we just need to make sure for certain things where it can't go down for a millisecond, do we have the supply chain resiliency there? And again, there's a lot of ways to do that. I don't think training a new model from scratch in Australia to replicate what other people have done is the most cost-efficient way to achieve that resiliency.
Thank you.
The era we live in with these massive tech and social media companies have just gone so big and in terms of influence and size. Is the only way we have real influence in the future with AI to have a behemoth ourselves in Australia? Is that the only way you get a proper chair at the table, if you like, of how that technology develops?
If you look at countries, you look at the UK versus the US and their productivity per person over the last period of time. The US has pulled away largely on the back of the fact that they are the centre of the tech giants around the world. And so whether that's in the B2B sense for Microsoft and Salesforce and a whole bunch of other companies that Atlassian is peers with, or whether that's in global consumer companies, or whether that's entertainment companies, Disney Plus and Netflix, those things are international. Now, the thing is when Uber's replaced taxis, a certain percentage of our taxi profits go to Uber overseas. When we buy Netflix and Disney Plus instead of Foxtel, more of the profits go overseas. Now, you could say, let's tax them, but at a practical level, that really is taxing Australia to do that, and so that you've got to use that sparingly. You could say, let's not have them, but if you look at almost every case, if we chose not to use those international technologies, we'd either be harming our productivity as a nation or be harming our enjoyment and enjoyment as a nation, and so it's very hard to prohibit those ones. It just makes you fall behind. So the only way for us to ensure our nation's prosperity is to build things ourselves. Now, that was hard over the software era because, again, some of the software companies I talked about have been around for such a long period of time. But we're really just getting started in the AI era. And so data centers, 99% of the data centers that will exist have not been created yet. We could build that in Australia, and that could be a huge industry, building and servicing those. On AI, companies, we have an opportunity to do that. But it's not going to be let's go do the things that people have already done 5 years ago and copy them. That is not going to, that's not innovation, and that's not what's going to make it successful. Innovation happens when you create something new. And how do you create that? If you're consumer companies, you generally need a large domestic market, which is why China and the US really are the two places that create a lot of consumer companies. Domestic markets matter there. So that's one thing. But if you're looking at other areas, or particularly B2B, B2B innovation, a lot of that is running up against a problem that no one has run up against and start fixing it before everyone else in the world hits that same problem. And so as a nation, we can choose to say, hey, let's live in the future or live in the past. Radiology at the moment is the domain of radiologists. Computers are already better than radiologists in most senses of the word. Will radiologists exist in 20 years if computers can do it 100 times faster? Or would a radiologist doing it actually be a liability and you wouldn't get insurance because it's not as good as the computers? We could rush to that new world and say, great, well, how do we get this happening as fast as possible? There'll be some problem we'll discover on the far side of computers doing radiology that we'll need to solve. There could be a business that we export to the world. But until we get there, we're not going to be inventing it. If we drag our heels and say, no, we're going to do this slowly, then we won't be living in that future. So I do agree with the premise that technology drives productivity globally, but the sort of true wealth of a nation comes from harnessing that technology or owning that technology, and the profits from around the world accrue to Australia, and that's what we need to be doing.
Tom McElroy from The Guardian.
Thanks, Tom. Scott, thanks for taking our questions. I'm interested to ask you about water as one of the challenges of big data centres and the social licence that they would have in communities like here in Australia. Also interested to know if you think that the company tax rate is something that's holding back innovation and productivity in Australia.
Two very different questions, but I'll take them. Appreciate that. Look, the things that power data centers need, you need to build one, of course, which requires concrete and steel and all the things that building requires. It requires chips inside them. It requires cooling, so it requires energy for cooling. So it requires energy and requires water and a small number of staff on an ongoing basis. And so energy and water are rightly the two things. Energy we can fix with a grid, we can ship that around. Water's hard to ship long distances. And the reason you use water is it's the best way to cool something. So you can use less water, but you use more power. So that's the trade-off. I believe that we'll solve those issues that we can. There's innovative ways of doing that, of harnessing wastewater potentially to cool data centres. You can use seawater if you're near a coast, and we have a water coast in Australia to be able to do that. And so I do believe there's ways that we need to solve that. And like all fights over water in Australia, it comes down to, can we use innovative ways to do that? And so it is it could be a barrier to us in the medium term, but it should be a surmountable one. The company tax rate, I'm not an expert on that. I do know that when you think about company tax rate, you think about company tax rate for Australian companies where they operate domestically, and kind of the customers are domestically, banks, supermarkets, that make up a large part of our domestic economy. And then you often have to consider, what does the tax rate look like for a company that wants to put operations here in Australia from overseas? And often they're competing against low tax jurisdictions, and that's something that they need to consider. Now, we try and marry that with one particular tax rate in Australia, and I think we've done a reasonably good job of that. And it's also interesting to consider that we have franked dividends, which means that, which work really well for Australian-based companies and Australia-based shareholders, not so well for foreign-based companies with foreign-based shareholders. So I don't have a solution here. I do think that overall, as a tax, we need to think about that. I do think that at the moment, it's crazy that someone who is in their 30s on $100,000 a year pays twice as much tax as someone in their 60s who's retired on the same amount of money. People that have young kids trying to pay off their mortgage, working their way up the career ladder, are bearing a large proportional tax burden than people at a later stage of life. So I do think there might be some intergenerational things that need to be discussed there. But I don't think that's, I'm not an expert particularly on what we should be doing.
Thanks.
Jason Scott from Bloomberg.
Oh, sorry, I don't have questions.
No. Caitlin Rentoul from West Australian.
Thank you for your address. I'd like to get your opinions on regulation around AI. While I acknowledge you're saying that Australia needs to race towards it, there has been problems raised around nudifying deep fakes and the role that AI plays there. Where would you welcome AI? And then on the other side of that, ahead of the government's productivity roundtable, where could regulation harm Australia's innovation pathway forward?
Regulation of AI, I started in the camp of how do we have less new regulations and how do we have the regulations we currently have be applied better? And so in many cases like deepfake and impersonations, there are rules in the book about that that existed when I was a kid that it could be used in the AI sense. And so I haven't seen areas where people say, well, we're missing this clear harm needs regulation in order for us to be able to prosecute it. Of course, some things done at scale are different to things done one by one. And so there may need to be consideration about things that are done at scale, but I think we should look at that by exception. And also, once the harms have started to happen, or we acknowledge that they're actually a near and pressing need, rather than doing legislation in advance of that. Because it does then chill business. It's hard to regulate something we haven't created yet. And I think the software industry has benefited for the last 20 years that largely we could build enterprise software companies before governments decided that we needed to regulate things. So I think that's the right place to start. There are harms that could happen. People talk about, well, someone can build a bomb using AI or someone can use deep fakes using AI. All those things are currently illegal. And so I don't know we need new legislation there. In terms of areas where I do worry about AI, as I said, there will be new jobs. That's probably the biggest one, and it's making sure that employees and citizens have a clear transition there. I do think, election interfering, I think we have great laws on that, but we need to make sure that they are fit for purpose. There are a lot of carve-outs at the moment for politicians to really say whatever they want during an election. That seems a weird carve-out. It's like everyone else can't do these things, but politicians can say whatever they want, and make sure that, well, can they use deepfakes, and are they allowed to do those things? So I think there may be some things at the edge of to make sure our democracy still thrives in a world of AI.
Thank you.
Finn McHugh from Capital Brief.
Hey, Scott, thanks for your speech. You talked about AI essentially as being a race and that an early lead can turn into I think the phrase you used was unassailable lead. You also mentioned you're a Tour de France fan, so I might use that as the analogy. In the race as it stands, where does Australia sit? Are we in the peloton at the back of the race? And over the next decade, what countries do you see forming the breakaway pack?
Wow. Well, as a Tour de France fan, you'll also appreciate the different jerseys as well. So if you watch Tour de France, there are multiple races going on at the same time, and you can be a winner in one and loser in another. And so in Australia, that's true. Like we're not going to win the race for AI chips in the near future. We could win the quantum race, but like the AI chips race is not happening, right? Like we're a sprinter, you're not going to win the polka dot jersey. Like, that's where we are with that. With data centers, we have a huge opportunity to win in data centers because of all the things I've talked about before, the cost advantages, the scale, the location in Southeast Asia, and again, if we can get legislation right, potentially win there as well. So that's an area that I think we have a chance to win. Australia has done pretty well on B2B applications in the software world. I think that there's going to be a whole bunch of AI applications built on top of these models and the basic building blocks that have been built today. People don't know what those things are going to be, and I think Australia has a huge opportunity to do that. So they're the areas, and there's probably even other races that we're not familiar with, at the moment that we new jerseys are created, and I can't take this analogy any further. Sorry, thank you.
You mentioned legislation. I'll put my fear hat on, I guess, on behalf of journalism and publishers, because data mining, the concern has always been, publishers no longer have control of what they have, and AI takes that information. Is there a fairness issue there if big tech companies, whether it be ChatGPT or Atlassian or whatever, are able to do that data mining with relaxed copyright, but presumably data of ChatGPT or Atlassian would be protected?
Yeah, so there is a worry around copyright, and I think that people who spend a lot of time creating a work, whether it's a journalist or an author or a movie producer or a movie star, deserve to be compensated for the work that they have done. Now, the way the fair use exemptions work overseas is that the use has to be new and novel, and not basically taking away any dollars from the people that created that work. And so, yes, if AI and large language models can reproduce that exact article or reproduce that exact same book, that is a problem. In most cases, you can't do that. When you try and do that, the AI and large language model providers say you can't do that today. So they put the protections around that today. I think we do benefit from new and novel ways of putting works together. And I do think that is an exciting thing out there, but it has to be, it's not you can get to copy everything and repeat it verbatim. It is that those are new and novel applications that were not created and don't infringe on the existing rights out there. I do look at the world of copy and creation, and if you go back to a pre-globalized era, there was a lot of more local news and local TV and local newspapers, but a lot of that was recopying stuff from international news or international newspapers and just reprinting it locally. And that's going away because you can get it on the internet. But when you think about, okay, I want my local news about what's happening locally, that still needs to be created. Or if you're the world's best writer about a particular sports topic and you are passionate about the Sydney Swans, for example, and you can make it now a business selling just to Sydney Swans supporters. Like we've created these creators, the creator economy that didn't exist before technology. So I do think that, yes, publishing and copyright and other things will change, but there's huge opportunities for people that are great at what they do, at creating content, to sell in a totally new way in this age.
So whilst that creation, I guess, is novel from AI and what it's created, if it's still based off an element of that publishing, is there a revenue sharing model that would work along the lines of what the government's pushing for, say, Facebook and other social media at the moment?
There are ways today for publishers to exclude themselves from large language model crawlers if they choose to. I know Cloudflare has produced a model where people can exempt themselves from the large language model crawlers and then do a fee-for-service model. So there are things being explored out there, but I would want that to be done, on a business-by-business sense, rather than every person says, the whole government says nothing can be used. I think that's not that useful.
Sebastian Tan from AAP.
Hey Scott, thanks so much for your address. I just kind of have a question about the research and development of AI in Australia. You've talked about government reform, but what can big businesses do to also change AI? We've seen calls from companies that have over $100 million in annual revenue to invest in AI technologies and research. Do you think big companies like Atlassian, for example, should invest in AI? And if so, how would that boost our capabilities?
If you do the numbers on R&D investment across Australia, so we are not as good as we should be compared to our peers around the world. Now, R&D is interesting because that's where innovation comes from. You do research and then you develop it and then it becomes something new. And a lot of what Australian businesses just do the same thing again and again and again. And so the amount we spend on R&D is a kind of early canary as to how productive and how innovative we're going to be over the next decade or two. Robin Denholm, who was the previous chair of the Tech Council, is leading an R&D review at the moment, and that will be coming out over the next few weeks. But to preview some of that, it's big businesses in Australia are falling behind in their R&D investments. So small businesses, government, tech businesses are doing their fair share or their investments, but it's large businesses, the big end of town, that could be doing more and investing behind R&D. And so I do think that's the area, if we're going to focus as a nation like on areas to improve on, that's where I would be focused.
Thank you.
Nick Stewart from Ability News.
On copyright, isn't actually creating a news story that enables you to do something more, isn't that more worthwhile than just repeating a similar process? So, for example, shouldn't you actually pay the copyright to those people who are creating something that you can use and take further? Shouldn't they be more worthy of copyright than, for example, creators of a repetitive program like Atlassian that just keeps on turning out the same thing?
I'm not sure. Maybe you can rephrase the question?
Well, basically, you're talking about copyright and copyright not being worthwhile. Mm-hmm. Why is copyright not worthwhile for, say, an ephemeral news story, whereas it is worthwhile for a repetitive process like Atlassian?
Yeah, why is copyright, not... So firstly, I don't think copyright is not worthwhile at all. I think copyright is the fundamental reason. A lot of protections, right, whether it's patents or whether it's other protections of intellectual property, that's the foundation by which our entire knowledge economy depends, right? And so having our rule of law in Australia means that people invest in Australia because they have those protections around their digital assets. What I'm saying is that there are no exceptions for text and data mining. So like where you read all these things in and you change a large language model as a result, at the moment there are no exceptions for that. And so there is no fair use exception. You can't say I'm creating a new work. There are very small carve-outs for specific things like humour in Australia. That's out of step with almost every other area in the world. And so the way I say it is that I haven't seen any copyright holders in Australia that have seen more dollars than their counterparts overseas as a result. So it hasn't benefited anyone in Australia. And at the moment, it's holding back these large language models from investing in Australia to do that. Like I do think, copyright holders should get compensated for their content. I do think there's many technology ways in which you can exclude your content from those large language models, should you choose. So copyright is very important. I just think at the moment it's a huge multi-billion-dollar opportunity for us if we made those changes to put us in line with the rest of the world. Thank you.
James Riley from Innovation Oz.
Thanks, Scott. I sort of want to ask you about copyright also, but a bit tangential. I wanted to ask how far your thinking has got on your digital embassies proposal, and whether that thinking's kind of gone through a tech council process. But an embassy, to me, would suggest that we wouldn't need to do copyright reform in this country because the big players could come and use their embassy to do as they will, because Australian law would not apply to those to that infrastructure. So how would you see that playing out?
So the digital embassies concept, it's interesting when I look around the world who's explored it. There's a couple of areas. One is Estonia has established a digital embassy in it's either Amsterdam or Liechtenstein, I think, one of the Western European nations, in order to host a backup for their government data out there under the laws of Estonia. Singapore, because they ran out of land and because they ran out of power and water, they've actually explored a digital embassy where they put their data centers in Malaysia, which seems a weird concept where, a American company would put their data centers under Singaporean law hosted in Malaysia. Seems a weird concept where we could run around that and leave them just in US law. Now, I don't think that all the companies and countries would want a digital embassy. People want to put stuff in Australia for Australian purposes as well, where we have a strong rule of law and those types of things. I think it would be a choice for areas. I think that we would have choices to whether we would allow those embassies, to which countries we would choose to do that. I do believe that it requires some slight changes to legislation or to rules to make that happen. It's not something that could be happen overnight. But I think if Australian trade delegation went around the world and said, hey, we've got this concept, would you put more of your data here in Australia as a result of it? We have land, we have water, we have great, cheap ways of building these data centers for you. I think we would get a lot of take-up. And for some people, they would want a data embassy and all the things that are associated with it. And for others, they would just be excited about all the possibilities that Australia has. To answer your specific question around, which laws would they be subject to? They'd be subject to the laws of their own nation, much like if they had a data centre in the US. At a practical level, we see Australian companies that are looking at moving some of their training offshore because they're worried that if they train their models here in Australia, they could be at risk of lawsuits on copyright. And so it seems just a perverse situation where Australian companies are saying, I'm going to put my stuff in the US because of these laws.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Very briefly.
Oh, look, okay, you talked about Strategic Petroleum Reserve. What do you think about the idea of where we encourage AI factories to be set up here through foreign investment, that there be a strategic reserve of processing power for Australian sovereign AI training?
I'm a sort of a free market capitalist because I believe that over time it delivers the biggest value with a social safety net that helps out. And so when I look at AI or other things, I say, what can the free market do better than governments? And so there are areas where people can't get access to the latest models, or in academia or other areas where we might be able to assist with funding. But I don't know the government providing a model or a government owning a data centre is the best use of the resources or time. I think private enterprises do that well. And the great thing about the era we're in at the moment is you can rent most of these things, very cheaply. You don't have to put the capital outlay. It used to be if you wanted a business, you had to buy a building and then buy a PABX, if anyone remembers those things, a telephone system, and had to buy a photocopier that was this big. And these days, everything you buy, you can rent online, including capacity in a data center, including capacity with AI models. And so the biggest companies and the smallest companies have access to the same cutting edge models. And that's great because it actually levels the playing field in a way that we didn't have when I grew up, 40 years ago, where you had to be a big company to get access to the best.
Might just end on where you think startups are at. So obviously a couple of decades ago, your little venture went okay. If someone comes to you and says they've got this great idea for AI, given where we're at the moment, on all the various elements, including tax and R&D, which a lot of people lament and you haven't sort of spoken a lot about today. And they said, do I do it here or the US? What would your answer be?
Australia has a huge advantages to build a company here. The talent density, as has always been, it starts off in the US, so that's where Silicon Valley is, and that is a talent density that we don't have there in Australia. But the Australian tech ecosystem has grown from when I started 25 years ago. There was no technology startups here, and now we have plenty of technology startups. And so the spillover effects we find are that founders leave big companies, or we've had people leave Atlassian after 15 years and go start startups here in Australia and around the world. And so my advice, for all those people, is not necessarily where to build, because these days you can build a global company from Australia. It used to be the tyranny of distance, defined Australia. The fact that we were a long way from anywhere. These days you can ship bytes around the world instantly, and so that's a huge advantage for being in Australia. But also my advice for entrepreneurs is that build something you're passionate about. Go do something that really lights you up, and you're going to wake up every single day and go passionately at. And if you look at Australia, it's a place where two guys with an idea and a dream can build something from that to the fortunate position I'm in today. And so I feel lucky that we've managed to do that in Australia, and I would encourage others to do the same.
Well, we very much appreciate your time today. We've even got this membership for you so you can come back and talk to the journalists because you've had so much fun today. Scott Farquhar, thank you for your address, ladies and gentlemen.